Welcome to Wait, That's an Axe, the podcast where we dive into the wild, world changing stories of the early church and ask all the questions you didn't know you had.
Hi, I'm Sharon Hobbs. I'm a teacher, a lover of all things scriptural, and I am so excited to have a conversation about Acts every week.
And I'm Melissa Phipps, here to ask all the dumb questions, the curious questions, and maybe the ones you were too afraid to ask in Sunday school.
Together, we'll explore the book of Acts, not as a dusty piece of history, but as a living, breathing story of God's power, his people, and his purposes.
So expect lively conversation, honest curiosity, and a few, wait, that's really in there moments.
This is Wait, That's in Acts, where discovery meets faith and theology meets real life.
Sharon, this is the episode about fire and wind.
Let's do it again.
All right. That's one of my favorite songs.
I know, mine too.
So we know this is not the storm season.
Right.
And they hear this rumbling, this noise, and they're probably trying to figure out what it is. And it's described in the Bible as a sound like a mighty rushing wind. So my question is that pops up into my mind, like, where is this wind coming from?
This wind is the inrushing from the spiritual. You know, we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago about the realm of the spirit that is not just like, oh, far beyond our galaxy type thing. That's really a Greek thought. The Hebrew thought is that it's a realm where there's a veil between us, much like in the temple, where the veil divided the Holy of Holies from the holy place, right? And so this is, and the veil was torn, right?
Yes.
And when we have that torn veil, the wind of the Spirit can rush out of the spiritual realm and into this natural realm. And really, it's the same parallel as the wind rushing from the holy place to light the fire of the sacrifice.
I really liked when you read last week from the Passion Translation. So verse 2, it says, "Suddenly they heard the sound of a violent blast of wind rushing into the house from out of the heavenly realm."
Right. From out of the heavenly realm.
Yeah.
So it comes from out of that spiritual realm where that veil was rent and comes rushing into our natural realm where we can see, because God, think about this.
Okay, I'm ready.
For thousands of years, God has longed to be with his people. He created an Adam and Eve so that he could come and be with them.
Yeah.
And then he's been in this little box for so long in the temple, right? In trying to be in their midst, though he couldn't be manifest right there with them. But don't you think God, we are created in God's image? Yes?
Right. Yes.
Okay. We are created with great longing, with great desires, with emotions. Those are all part of God's image. Now, our emotions are often carry us off into fleshly things, right? Really, we are created with emotions. God has emotions. He's been longing for this. I can just imagine him rushing, the running father, coming into the realm saying, finally, my son has made it possible for me to come and be in the midst of people that I have created and longed for so long. That's what I think.
That's going to make me cry, and nobody's surprised by that, but the love of the Father is so great and so deep.
Amen.
Okay. Verse 3. And divided tongues of fire, as of fire, appeared to them and rested on each of them. So is this actually fire?
Okay.
It could be. I
It
don't know.
could
I'm
be.
really asking because I don't know the answer.
I don't know that I know the answer specifically. I do know that the original patterns were truly fire. You
Mm.
know, we have the pillar of fire, like we read last week from the Passion Translation. It describes it as the pillar of fire comes into the room and then divides out and rests upon each one of them. The fire at the temple really was a physical fire that came out and lit the sacrifice.
So
You know,
probably.
I mean, it wasn't a fire that physically burned their flesh
Right.
because it wasn't a fire of destruction. There's a difference. Passion, the fire that we talk about, that's a good thing. And fire can do great, wonderful things.
Right.
And fire can do very destructive things.
That's true.
Even like we, in our natural church world today, have removed a lot of the power and authority and fire of God. But the Bible tells us, behold, the goodness and the severity of God.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
fire of God can be both passionate, positive, and build you up, or it can burn you.
Yeah.
It can
refine us in a not very fun way sometimes.
That's right. So I don't know that we can say, you know, it's not the fire like is in your wood stove. I'm pretty sure it's not that fire, but it's a fire nonetheless that can refine them as well as empower them.
Awesome. And it rested on each one. I found that term interesting, that it rested on each of them.
Okay. So I think this is very interesting.
And you're looking at the Passion Translation?
I am. So when it says, and they were filled, so it rested over them.
Yes.
Okay. Back to the pillar that rested over the tabernacle and then would lift up and move.
Yes.
It rested over them because they were going to become the tabernacle, right?
Yes.
But then it not only rested over them, it filled them. You know, the next line tells us that they were filled. And I want to read this note out of the Passion Translation that I think is very interesting. It says, there are two Greek words used for filled. In verse 2, it is polero, which means filled inwardly. All right.
Filled inwardly. Okay.
In verse 4, it is paletho, which means filled outwardly.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Okay.
Or, as Brian Simmons has translated it, furnished and equipped. So, inwardly filled and outwardly covered with that same power, authority, equipping. Okay. This was the anointing of the Spirit for ministry. Every believer needs the filling of the Spirit both inwardly for life and outwardly for ministry.
Wow.
You know, I think that's a hint for us, just Bible studiers, that we translate in English and use the same word for different things. And so a lot of times when you're studying the Bible, there are plenty of online sources that you can go to and find and compare. And, you know, is this filled the same as that filled? Because a lot of times that will really enhance your understanding of Scripture. So just thought that was an interesting note.
It is very interesting digging for treasure sometimes. You're
is.
like, oh, that's interesting. Why does it say that? And when you start to look, it leads to this thing and that thing. And it's like all of a sudden you've unwrapped this great
Gift.
revelation, a gift. Yes,
That's
for
right.
sure. Okay. About the filling, so So they began to speak in other tongues. Can we unpack other tongues a little bit?
Sure.
Help me to understand that. Languages that we understand? Is it
Okay,
languages we
so
don't understand? What are they talking about
okay,
here?
so back to patterns. First of all, when in the Old Testament did languages get divided?
At the Tower of Babel, that was a big language event when
That's right.
God divided
And
the
why
peoples.
did he do that?
They were attempting to enter heaven and overthrow God.
That's right.
Big
They were building
plans.
in study, we call them ziggurnauts. They were building a temple.
Yes, it's
Okay.
like pyramid shape.
Right. A circular kind of building up and up and up and up. So they were building a temple opposed to God,
Yeah.
who dwelt in a temple, wanted the earth to be his temple,
Yes.
right? Originally. But they were creating this false temple. And so he came in to destroy their unity so that then they were unable to build this false temple.
Mm.
Okay. So now we have a pattern that's bringing back a unity through restoring of language, and it's the languages of heaven. Now, there is a big debate, and I haven't chosen a side because I don't know, and
You're not convinced
I'm not
either way
convinced
yet.
either side. But there's a big debate in scholarly circles about whether all of these that heard in their own language, if the speaking was physically their language, right? Or if the speaking was heavenly languages, heavenly tongues, right? That they then perceived or heard in their own language. Now, I will tell you that I know people who have heard, and this is probably going to rattle a few cages, but I know people who have heard people speaking in tongues. This person over here perceives as some heavenly language. They don't know what it is. It's just speaking in tongues. But a person in this congregation who speaks a certain language hears that language and hears it, understands it as their own language.
Yeah. I've heard stories about that too.
Yeah. I know a person personally that had that event happen.
That's pretty phenomenal. God will do anything to reach people.
He will.
And
will.
I'm not, well, I'm challenged a lot sometimes in my thinking. And in this case, I'm like, God would do that to reach that person.
Absolutely. And he has no problem because he speaks every language and he doesn't, he speaks it in your head. He can speak in your head just like you can hear the voice of God if you are just walking down the road.
Yeah.
Paul heard the voice of God.
Yeah.
What did everybody around him hear?
Not that.
Thunderings.
Oh, yeah.
Thunderings. Right. That's what it describes. But he heard the voice of God and he heard it in a way that he could comprehend and know what it said. Okay. But, God also, for his purposes, uses people. And another instance, I know somebody who in a foreign language, in a foreign country, thinking they were speaking in tongues, actually spoke the gospel in the language of that people and many people. So I would say in that instance, he probably actually spoke that language that he didn't know, So we try often, and this is, I think, just a human tendency. We try to define things.
Mm-hmm.
We want God to operate in a way that we comprehend, that is expected, even if it's a supernatural thing. I want it to be the way I expect that supernatural thing to happen.
What I'm comfortable with.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What I once knew. If I really understood and saw God work in this supernatural way, and I perceived that was God and it was supernatural, then I want God to do that thing again, because I know that was God. I understand that.
Yeah.
I can comprehend what God wanted to do there. I don't think God's very confined by our
No.
methods and plans.
No. Yeah.
I think he probably actually has fun doing things in ways that
Unexpected.
always shock us and
Yeah.
always go, no, if I really comprehend or understand exactly how that works. He's still doing unusual things. And the best way that we can operate is with a kind of an open heart, an open, God's God.
Mm-hmm.
He can do anything he wants in any way he wants, right?
Yeah,
And
for sure.
he's more than happy to confirm himself to us. If
Yes.
we're willing to say, okay, well, I've never seen that before. Now this, I'm going to tell you something that most people think is totally weird.
Okay, I'm ready.
Many years ago, in the earlier charismatic movement, there was this thing about God giving people like gold teeth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's
was
interesting.
super weird. Like, that made no sense to me. I was like, I just think
I would have to ask for confirmation on that
that's-
myself.
Yeah, it was like, I mean, I had at least 4 or 5 reasons why God would never do that thing. Okay, God's a healer. I can understand him replacing your teeth with an original, good, normal tooth,
Yes,
right? That
sure.
makes sense to me. Why would God do some random, weird thing? But then I met somebody that I absolutely knew was not a crackpot, was a real, true, sold out believer. And he said, yeah, I doubted it too until he did it to me.
Oh, wow.
And I said, seriously? I didn't want that to be true because I didn't like that.
That was too weird.
That's too weird. It's still too weird for me. But I had to at least back up and say, who am I? Who am I to say God can't do some weird thing that he might like to do?
Right.
So there's a lot of things that I just hold with God. I don't have to know. And I don't have to have a judgment on that.
Yeah.
I had to kind of give up my
Opinion.
about that one.
Just put it on a shelf and find out later. Awesome. So another interesting point about this is that these were Galileans who were speaking in these other languages.
That's right.
And Galileans were known for not having a college in town. And they were considered to be
The Israel rednecks. What can we say?
Yes. So it was peculiar to the people for them to hear, because it wasn't uncommon for people to know multiple languages.
Right, absolutely. And actually, think about this. Peter preaches, and he doesn't preach in 30 different languages. He preaches in one language of the day that everybody spoke, right? So it was not necessary for these tongues to occur for these people to actually hear the gospel, because they heard the gospel in a language that they all spoke. But what does the Bible tell us? They heard when they heard them speaking in the languages that they understood. What does it say? Read that verse.
I will find it here. And began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. We can go on to the next section. Now there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And at this sound, the multitude came together, And they were bewildered because each one was hearing them speak in his own language. And they were amazed and astonished, saying, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear each of us in his own native language?" Then it gives a big list: Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome. Jews, proselytes, Cretans, Arabians, we hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God.
Right.
And all were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?"
So here we don't hear them giving the gospel message in
True.
tongues. That's not what they did. What they did was they were declaring the mighty works of God.
Yeah. I guess I never really dialed in on the fact that God didn't have to do this, because there was a common language of the day that he did this as a sign to the people to show them what he's up to unveil this more of his plan and give them revelation
And to go back
and
about
to
it,
reunite the
right.
languages.
And all of these that had come, they were knowledgeable in all of the Jewish history. They understood, like, all this stuff we were talking about, the temple, all of this stuff about Babel, all of this stuff about the Garden of Eden, and all of that, that was understood. But we have to think about it and learn it, because it's not genuinely understood by us, but it was all known to them. So when they saw these things happen, they had the understanding of, oh, God is coming back. He is doing this thing again in a new way.
Yeah.
So that's why all of those things happened for them, not the way that we think of it as happening, but they had all of that past patterns and history and understanding to recognize, oh, this is that.
They picked up on that real quick.
Exactly.
We're the ones who have to study.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. There's one more thing at the end of this little section. And it was the part where these people that are speaking in other tongues are being mocked.
Yes.
And the mockers are saying they are filled with new wine. Just looking at, but others, the Passion says, but others poked fun at them and said they're just drunk on new wine. So what does that mean? Just reading it at first blush, like new wine, old wine, what's the difference?
Okay, so that goes back to another pattern. All right. New wine was wine that was from that season. Okay. And new wine was not desired. It hadn't aged. It hadn't been prepared. If you're a wine connoisseur, and I'm not, I don't know very much about wine. Wine sits in the cellar for 2 or 3 years, and then you buy this certain vintage from a certain year. And the older they are, more valuable they are. So it's really saying the bums on the street drink cheap wine, haven't been aged. And that's really what they're saying is, these guys are drunk on cheap wine, right? But the pattern that God is establishing here is the Jews had old wine, right? They had all of the Torah. They had all of their traditions. They had all of their systems. That was valuable to them, right? But he was coming in with new wine, not aged, not established, not considered valuable by all of these priests and rabbis. The new wine, the cheap wine, was given to the poor people. That's who could afford the new wine, the cheap wine, right?
Yeah.
So God's coming in and saying, hey, this is wine for anybody. Anybody
Yes.
can get this wine.
Wow. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
But, honestly, goes back to me thinking, yeah, those gold teeth, that's bunk. That's exactly what they were thinking. Yeah, this is all bunk. I don't know. God would never do something like that. That's so weird. Why would God do
that?
this weird thing? So that's really was their kind of approach about this. Like, I don't think so. It doesn't fit in my pattern of the way that God would act.
Hopefully they got it figured out later.
I hope so.
Hoping for
A
them.
bunch of them already said, I don't care. This seems like this is a real deal. When I met God, it was kind of like I came with, I don't care if it's weird, God. If it's real, I want it. So you show me if it's real. And God showed them it was real.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this episode.
All right. So what's our next week? You have any thoughts yet?
Well, they say Pentecost is the church's birthday, but we use that word church a lot. So I think we should unpack that word next time.
Oh, that sounds really fun. That's another one of my favorites.
Well, I'm excited.
All right. Thanks,
Thank you, Sharon.
Melissa. We love you so much. And a big shout out and thanks to Tara, who runs our podcast for us. We appreciate you, girl. She's our timer, so if we're off time, it's her fault.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of Wait, That's an Axe, where I ask the questions and Sharon brings the theology.
And together, we uncover just how wild, surprising, and inspiring the book of Acts really is.
If you learned something new, laughed a little, or had one of those, wait, that's in there moments, share this episode with a friend.
And you can find more conversation, notes, and upcoming topics wherever you get your podcasts.
Until next time.
Keep asking questions. Keep discovering the God who is better than you imagined.